Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Rusty Wrench Restorations. I'm Steve, and this video is going to go over a few components of this 1960 John Deere 430 crawler, and we're going to continue with the disassembly of it. So a couple things look a little different maybe from the last video. I removed the hydraulic cylinders for the blade assembly, as well as the rear fenders, the battery box, the seat. Just some small items just to kind of get out of the way to make it easier to work on things. Couple parts to this video today. One, I do want to do a little tutorial about the driven clutch or the drive clutch assembly for this tractor. Really because the same basic components and equipment that are in this drive clutch are the same things that you'd find on your personal vehicle. If you have a manual transmission car, truck, a wheeled tractor, that type of thing. Same basic principle. So if you don't know how a clutch works, we'll go over that. Another section I do want to talk about is the final drive clutches that are inside these components here. And we'll get way more in depth of those once we get those final drives off and I can get to the steering clutches. But I do want to do a quick little rundown of things that you can look at if you're in the market to purchasing a small crawler like this. When you go to look at it, how do you know the condition of these and whatnot? So we'll go over that real quick. The tracks are coming off today. I'm not going to lie, I cheated a little bit. Yesterday I came out here. I started getting the master pins out, make sure they moved freely. It's different with every crawler, depending on how much maintenance was done. If tracks had been off in the past before, whether it be to work on final drive components or roller assemblies or whatever it may be, or they may not have been off in decades, right? So it's kind of a roll of the dice type thing when it comes to tracks. Sometimes they come off real easy, and other times, I mean, you could fight these things for days, right? Where we need to soak and let the penetrating oil soak in, get the torch with a rosebud, heat everything up. So like I said, I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit yesterday. I just wanted to make sure things were going to move smoothly for today, for today's videos. So we don't anticipate any problems. They should come off fairly easy. And then once the tracks are off, that'll be kind of a sped up video, right? Because it is a lot of grunt work, moving stuff around, being careful not to pinch fingers between these different shoes of the track assemblies. And then of course we're going to use the John Deere 855 to pull the track assemblies out. Later today I'll be going through and cutting and removing all these bolts that hold the pads or shoes to the chain assembly, the rail. All those are going to get replaced with new hardware. Everything comes apart for cleaning and painting. I also have 2 additional 1/2-inch holes drilled in each shoe so that I can mount rubber pads to these so that I can use it in a parade, indoor car shows, parking lots, so that we're not tearing up the roads and driveways and whatnot. So a little bit extra that goes into that most people usually don't do. I'll go over that later on in the video also. But that's pretty much it. So we'll go over the drive clutch, the steering clutches. We'll pull the tracks off. I'll go over the different track components, the undercarriage components, and hopefully you learn something from there. Another thing, besides obviously collecting tractors, I love old literature for these things, right? I scour eBay and garage sales and just people who I know in the tractor community trying to find original type things, right? So here's a couple original books. This first one here is the sales brochure for the John Deere 430 crawler. These things can go anywhere from, I've been able to steal one pretty much for about $30 or $40 on eBay. Someone kind of listed it, didn't know what they had. And sometimes they can go up to $150, $200, right? So I don't know, it's just really neat looking through these, seeing what they thought at the time was interesting or important things to try to get people to buy these. So, but another point I wanted to mention out is, as you can see on the front of this new John Deere 430 crawler. So you'll hear me refer to this as a crawler all the time. And you might say, Steve, why do you keep calling that a crawler? It's a bulldozer. Well, it's really not. So in this configuration, a tracked tractor, right, meaning a tractor with tracks, because they built basically wheeled tractors with this same frame and engine, right? So this is a 430 crawler. There's also a 430 tractor with rubber tires on it. It's the same engine, the same torque tube, transmission. The only thing that's different is it doesn't have the steering clutches, right? And that's how John Deere got into the crawler business. They started off with a John Deere BO, right, which is a Model B tractor, the orchard style. And a company in Washington would get these engine and transmission assemblies from John Deere, and they would put their own undercarriage on. Undercarriage meaning all the whole track assembly. And that was the Lindemann company, Jesse Lindemann. So the Lindemann crawler is really the first John Deere crawler, even though it wasn't made by John Deere. The Model B tractor was the drivetrain for that small crawler from Lindemann. John Deere ended up buying them out, and they did the MC crawler. That was during the letter series. So your A, B, your H, your G. That was their Model M tractor. So you'll have the MC, meaning crawler, the MT, which is a tricycle, like the Sweaty Betty tractor that I have, and the regular M, which is your full-wheeled rubber tire tractor as well. They did that same thing all the way through once they got into the number series, so the 40 series, the 420, and then eventually the 430. So there's the crawler, the tricycle, and then the four-wheeled version. And basically the drivetrain's the same, it's just the wheel or track configuration is different. So with that being said, the tractors are called crawlers. Here's the original owner's manual for it, John Deere 430 crawler tractor. It's not until you add a blade onto the front of the crawler or the tractor that it becomes a bulldozer. So here's another original owner's manual, John Deere number 62 bulldozer. And that is for the blade that goes on the front. So the blade is really the bulldozer. You might hear it as a dozer blade, and you know, everybody's got different terminology, right? Depending on what part of the country you're in. But I think you will see that everybody will agree that a tractor or a crawler is just that. It's not a bulldozer until either you put a blade on it or the blade itself would be called the bulldozer. So, and these crawlers can be used for other things besides pushing dirt, right? The 420s and then into the 430s had the 3-point hitch, which was an option that was available to put on the back. Not many people got that option. Most farmers were just using wheeled tractors. So to get one with a 3-point hitch in the back is nice. It's highly desired, and they're very expensive. You can spend upwards of $3,000 to $5,000 just on the components to put a 3-point hitch on this tractor. In fact, just the top link, which is the center link in the top of that 3-point system, just that top link piece, I don't have one back here, but those go for about $1,500 to $2,000 just for that one piece. So, and the one that I would have here is not an original one from a crawler. But anyway, they can be used for other things, right? Pulling discs, pulling plows. I've seen videos of people using them to pull corn pickers. So pretty much anything. Logs out of the woods. So crawler, bulldozer blade on the crawler. Now it's a bulldozer. So anyway, enough about that. I'm going to stop this here. We're going to go through and do the little tutorial on the drive clutch. We'll talk about, like I said, things to look for on the steering clutches if you're looking to buy one of these crawlers. We'll do some high-speed video yanking the tracks, and then go over track components. So that's it. Let's see what we can get into. All right, here we go. So I want to do this quick little tutorial about the clutch, or the drive clutch, because there may be some of you who have never taken this apart before or know what it is or how it works. And this clutch, though, for this crawler is pretty much the same as what you're going to find on any manual transmission car, truck, tractor, anything, right? So, all right, this heavy thing here, this is your flywheel. This one, I'd say probably weighs about 60 to 80 pounds, somewhere in there. I'm not a human scale, but it's heavy, right? This bolts onto the back of the crank of your engine, right? So your crankshaft is at the bottom of your engine. It connects all your pistons and basically is the driving rotational force as that engine makes power, right? So this front end of the flywheel, there's a dowel on here so that it is balanced, goes in the right part of the crank. That slides onto the back of the crank, and there's 4 bolts that go through and hold this flywheel onto the crank. So what is a flywheel? So this flywheel, as I said, is very heavy. When the engine's running, it makes basically a rotational mass, right? The inertia from this thing spinning, it takes a long time to slow it down. So let's say for this crawler with the blade on the front, and I'm driving it and I want to push some dirt. Once that tractor gets into the dirt and it starts to get a load on it, it's really going to try to bog down the engine, right? And that governor assembly, like we talked about in the other video, is going to try to make up for that, right? And increase engine RPM. In the meantime, if we didn't have this flywheel on here, basically we would lose so much rotational mass in that engine, it would drive it down and it would stall the engine out. So this flywheel, just from spinning, will keep that inertia moving. So even when a heavy load is all of a sudden put onto the engine, it's going to continue to run. You'll hear it slow down a little bit, but that governor will pick up, add more fuel, and off you go. So here's your flywheel assembly. You can see on the back side here, there's some teeth. Looks like a gear. It's basically what it is. It's a ring gear. This flywheel assembly sits inside of this bell housing, and there's a hole here. You can put my hand in there. The starter sits here. So when the starter goes in there, the starter teeth line up with this ring gear, and that's how the starter gets its, electrical power goes to the starter motor, spins the starter gear. There's a Bendix in there, and that gear will engage with these teeth and turn the engine over. That's how we start the engine, right? So flywheel, starter ring gear. This is your clutch plate. It's basically, this is a single stage clutch, so it's just one plate in here. And it's got fiber discs on both sides. And in the center of this clutch plate, you'll see some splines, right? Just like an internal gear. So this flywheel spins when the engine's running. This clutch plate splines onto these shafts, which goes back to your transmission, right? So when this clutch plate is spinning, your transmission is spinning, right? There's a smooth shaft here. It's not too smooth now. It needs to be cleaned up, but this is your pilot bushing, and it goes into your pilot bearing inside that flywheel, right? And basically, let me slide this back here so I can get that pilot bushing in. So basically, your engine's running, your transmission's not, right? So this flywheel spinning, this shaft is not, and the plate is not spinning. That's either if you're in when you have the clutch pedal engaged. I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. Let me pull this back off. So clutch disc, and then we have your pressure plate assembly, right? So on this face of it, it's dirty and rusty now, but it's basically a smooth metal surface, almost like a brake rotor on your car. This one here has 3 spring assemblies with fingers on the inside, and this goes together with the clutch plate inside the flywheel housing, right? This pressure plate, and it's probably hard to see in the video, there's 2 bolts on each of these 3 corners. They bolt to the flywheel, okay? So this whole pressure plate assembly will also spin with the flywheel. So your basic operation for any manual transmission vehicle, including this crawler, is you have a foot clutch. You're going to push, it could be a hand clutch also, but let's not go down that path. A foot clutch. You depress the foot clutch. This is your throw-out bearing, right? So this one, you can hear it's terrible. This throw-out bearing face rides on those 3 fingers in that pressure plate, all right? So when you push your clutch pedal down, it pushes, this is exaggerated, but it pushes this throw-out bearing assembly into the fingers on this pressure plate. Now, when this throw-out bearing is good, it's going to start spinning, right? Because this pressure plate is bolted to the flywheel that's spinning. So it's going to spin, and those fingers are going to ride on the face of that bearing. It's going to push on these 3 tabs. I can't push them by hand here. You can push down on it with some force. But when it pushes on those 3 springs, it's going to separate this bolted housing, this pressure plate disc, right? It's not going to separate them, but it's going to pull that disc away from your clutch disc and the flywheel. So now, just like in your car or on this tractor, when you push your foot clutch in, your clutch disc is now going to stop spinning, and the flywheel and the pressure plate are going to be spinning on the front and back sides of it, right? It'll allow you to shift your transmission into gear because this shaft isn't spinning all the gears inside anymore. Once you get it into, let's say, first gear and you let off that clutch, that spring pressure is going to compress the pressure plate, this clutch disc, and the flywheel together as one unit. So now your engine that's running is also driving your clutch assembly and spinning this shaft, which is in turn spinning your transmission gears. So a couple things to know if you have a clutch problem is if the clutch slips, right? So either these fiber discs are worn, which is typically the case, right? I mean, they're made to wear after time. These discs or the clutch fiber discs are worn. Sometimes the metal surface of the pressure plate's bad. The springs could be bad. So what happens is when you let off that clutch and the spring pressure is supposed to make these 3 individual pieces one, it doesn't have that clamping force, so that it slips the clutch. And that's what you'll smell sometimes. You'll smell this fiber pad, this clutch pad burning. So that's one indication of a clutch that's not going well. That's going bad, I should say. The other time you'll notice that is if you're driving, you have the clutch pedal off, you're in gear and you're moving, and you try to accelerate. Again, this clamping force isn't enough to keep these 3 pieces together as one, and this clutch plate will start to slip inside there, and it won't let you increase in speed. Excuse me. Or in this case with a crawler, if I had the blade on the front and I'm trying to push some dirt, the engine's still going to be running, but I'm not going to be moving anywhere. It's just slipping this clutch inside. The other indication that you have an issue with the clutch is you push your clutch in, you try to shift gears, and you hear the gears grinding, right? So that's usually an issue with this pressure plate. Sometimes this cast piece could get broken, or springs, the throwout bearing. And what's happening is it's not allowing, when you press the clutch and push these springs in, it's not allowing these 3 pieces to separate enough so that the engine, flywheel, and the pressure plate are spinning independent of the disc. So it's still trying to turn this disc, even though it shouldn't be, which is in turn turning the shaft and turning your transmission gears. That's why you get that grinding. You're trying to get your transmission into gear, and instead of having 2 nice gears that are stopped to slide into each other, you have one that's spinning a little bit, and they're grinding on the edges of the teeth. So also, if you depress your clutch pedal, you hear weird noises, squealing, rubbing. That's indication your throwout bearing is going bad. And these are replaceable. They do come off. Of course, it's stuck on there right now. But anyway, that's your basic rundown of your clutch assembly. Flywheel, clutch disc, pressure plate, and your throwout bearing is really the main one. Your car or truck isn't going to have this shaft, right? Your transmission is mated up to the clutch, right to the engine up here in the bell housing assembly. And your transmission would be right behind it. But because of just the way this tractor is designed, the transmission's in the back. So we have this basically like a drive shaft that connects them together. So this would be like your drive shaft in your car that connects the transmission to the rear end or the differential. This one here, the transmission and the differential are all in the back. So just different placement of the components, but they all do the same thing. So anyway, that's a clutch in a nutshell, drive clutch. Really not too much to it. Just a matter of getting everything cleaned up and make sure everything works properly, and we might even still be able to use this one. So that's that. All right, for this video here, basically I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the steering clutch assemblies. If you're in the market to buy one of these crawlers, some of the things to look for, right? So Obviously, the easiest thing, if it's running, you can drive it. That would be the best way to test to see if these are working properly. But most cases, you're going to find that they're not. So one thing you could do is you could have the person hook up another vehicle or a tractor to pull you. And as it's pulling you, you could try operating your clutch handles, right, to see if the clutches are working, right? So we kind of talked about this in another video as well. These handles are basically the same thing as your foot clutch for your drive clutch, right? Only instead of pushing on it with your foot, you're pulling it back with your hand. So as you pull back, it's going to disengage the clutches that are inside this housing. These clutches are a little bit different. I talked before, like old literature and stuff. I love like new old stock John Deere parts as well. They do get a little pricey, but anyway, here's an example of a metal plate. And this one here has 6 tabs on it. In between these metal plates, there's fiber plates, and they have more of like it looks like a gear, almost like the ring gear on the flywheel, right? So there's a stack of, I want to say there's like, I'm probably off, 6 or 7 metal and like 7 or 8 fiber, if I remember right, but they're all stacked up. And it also has a pressure plate assembly. It's the same one that's actually in this clutch housing anyway. So what happens is when you want to steer, you pull back on your steering lever. Let me zoom out of this a little bit here so you can see a little more. So you pull back on this steering lever and it's going to disengage that clutch, right? It's compressing. The same throwout bearing that's pushing on that pressure plate is inside this steering clutch housing. So it's going to separate these metal and fiber discs, and they'll actually slip between each other so that this drive sprocket will just run like idle, right? It's like in neutral. It'll just roll. If you continue to pull back on this steering clutch lever, it will also engage a brake, right? There's a brake band inside here, and it will stop this sprocket completely so that this other track will keep turning. And basically, instead of just turning nice and slow, you'll be able to pivot a lot faster and turn basically on itself. So where I'm getting at with this whole thing is a couple things you can look at when you're going to buy a crawler. These access covers come off real easy. They're like 7/16 bolts, just 4 of them. There's supposed to be a cork gasket in here, so I always make sure I replace those. You can see there's a slit here in this cover that acts as a vent. And then at the bottom of this steering clutch housing, there's plugs. This one doesn't have them in there, which probably is what saved me. The plugs are there to drain any moisture or condensation or water that gets in here. So sometimes you'll see that these things sit for years and water will leak in, and it basically fills this up with water. And these metal clutch discs will rust and rot and delaminate, and it just tears up the whole clutch assembly. So anyway, excuse me, you're going to look at a tractor or crawler. You want to look inside here. You can get a pretty good idea of condition of things. It's really probably hard to see, but down inside, there's little springs there. Everything looks to be in decent shape. It's not all rusted and rotted out, right? This is also where you can make an adjustment for your brake band. I'm trying to see if I can see this with the light here. But there's a brake band that goes on the outside there. And that's the brake I'm talking about. When you pull this lever back, you can see it engages the brake at the end, right? So at the beginning, let's see, I think if I take this plate off, you might be able to see a little better. All right, so here we go, down inside here. Let's see if I can get a better light. All right, you see that bolt head on the left-hand side? It sits inside of like a angled channel, right? To the right of that, it's like a yellowish colored thing with some grease on it. That's the thrust bearing. The throwout bearing. So just like the throwout bearing for the drive clutch, there's a throwout bearing on each side back here. So I'm going to try to see if I can hold the flashlight and the camera, and you're going to see that throwout bearing push on those 2 fingers. There's one at the top and one at the bottom on the right hand side of that throw out bearing. Let's see if I can do this without dropping the flashlight here. Oh, sorry about that. A little strobe action. All right, I need a third hand is what I need. All right, let's try this. There we go. All right, so I'm going to pull back on that steering lever. You'll see that throw out bearing get pushed into those two fingers, back and forth, back and forth. So disengage, engage, disengage, engage, right? So that's a proper clutch throw out bearing that's working well. And that bolt is what you use to adjust the position of that throw out bearing, right? And the reason I bring that up is this left steering handle, it's pretty tight right from go, right? Because that throw out bearing is already pushed up against the teeth, right? So here we are with that throw out bearing. It's just sideways now, right? So it's already pressed up against those teeth. The one on this side is not, right? So I'll show you on this lever. Look, I can just do one finger. Like this thing just moves so easy, right? So if you look down inside here, this one is not adjusted properly. Again, I need a third hand, but I'm going to pull back on this lever. You see how much movement there is in that throw out bearing? But it's not even pushing on those fingers of the pressure plate yet. So this one here is just not adjusted properly. So that bolt head right there would need to get loosened up. I can push the throw out bearing towards the pressure plate and then tighten that that nut, and it'll lock the throw out bearing sleeve in place. So anyway, if you're in the market to buy one of these things, it doesn't take much. I mean, this just screws on, you know, bring you a little punch and hammer. Sometimes they're stuck. These brake adjustment covers, it's just got 4 7/16 bolts. Easy day, right? But that'll let you look inside the steering clutch housing and try to get, you know, an idea of the condition of everything. But what they're designed for is this is to adjust your brake band, and this is to adjust the throw out bearing on your steering clutch. So if you have the time and you're able to pull these off, when the seat assembly's on here, this back inside one's kind of hard to get to, but anyway, that'll give you a real good indication of the, you know, the condition of your steering clutches, because they get expensive, right? Like, you know, you can replace just these metal discs. I think you can get all the fiber discs for like, it's like $70 per side. But if you have to rebuild the whole steering clutch assembly to get all the metal discs, all the fiber discs, the throw out bearing, the pressure plate, I want to say the last time I looked, it was about $650 per side, right? So you're looking at $1,300 with shipping and everything. Your little gaskets, I mean, you're looking at probably $1,500 just in replacing steering clutches on a machine that maybe you paid $1,000 for and you thought you were getting a good deal. Well, now you're at $25, right? So this stuff adds up real fast, you know. Everybody likes crawlers. They think they're cool, and they are. But not only are they a lot of work, they're very heavy, taking stuff apart, but they get real expensive real fast. Steering clutches are expensive. The drive or driven clutch, it's about the same, but, you know, in order to get to it, you got to pull the engine off, right? You know, we already talked about undercarriage, you know, all your rollers underneath, bearings, the final drive bearings, like this one here. I know we'll get to it eventually, but, you know, we talked about this sprocket over here, how it's just way out of whack. So, you know, both of these final drives are going to have to get rebuilt with new bearings, seals. So I do it for a reason. I do it so that when it's done, I know I don't ever have to do it again, right? Because it's such a tedious job restoring these crawlers that I don't want to have to pull an engine. I don't want to have to pull tracks off again. I don't want to have to pull final drives. You know, I'm a one and done when it comes to these things. Anything worth doing is worth doing right, you know. So it might cost a little more, but just do it the right way, and you don't have to worry about it. You can just enjoy driving it and taking it to shows, you know. So anyway, that's enough of the tutorials for now. I'm going to do a high-speed video of me getting these tracks off. And then once I get the tracks off, I'll go over the components of the track system and undercarriage real quick, just so that you have an idea what things are called. So I appreciate it. Let's take these tracks off. Track day. All right, well, now that the tracks are off, I'd like to say the hard part's over, but that's not necessarily the case. This is what we're left with. So basically the frame with the undercarriages, right? The undercarriage being pretty much everything that's painted yellow. So just want to go over a couple components real quick with you here. So these wheels in the front, these are your idler wheels. They're idler because they idle. They're not driven, right? In the back, we have the drive sprockets. So these are the geared sprockets, if you will, just like a bicycle chain, right? Well, inside the tracks, there's a chain that goes around here. So that's pretty much how that works. And then here's just a better shot of your final drive housing. So this whole thing all underneath bolted up on here, this is your final drive, right? So there's a shaft that comes off the transmission through the steering clutches and into here. There's a bearing underneath this cover. That's your drive gear. And then underneath that is the driven gear, or the bull gear, the bigger gear that goes on the bottom part here, that has the shaft that comes out to hook up to basically your axle shaft for your drive sprocket. Your undercarriage assembly also consists of idler wheels, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. The Lindemann crawlers and the early MC crawlers had 3 idlers. The later 40s and 420s and 430s went to 4, with an option for the 5 roller. I think the 5 roller was only an option for the 420 and the 430. And basically it just extended the front tracks out a little bit further for dozer blades, or if you put a loader assembly on there, it would keep the crawler from tipping forward as much. I had a 3-roller MC with a blade, and anytime you lift the blade up off the ground, the front of the crawler would nose dive down. So anyway, these idler wheels are tensioned by these springs, right? So let me get above here. You can see looking down a little better. There's one on each side, and those drive springs, or the idler springs, push this idler wheel forward. That's what keeps tension on your track. So if the track is too loose, you run the risk of throwing a track. Basically, the track will come off of the sprocket or the idler up here, right? You can see this flange on the idler wheel. It rides inside the rail, right? So anyway, we tension these idler wheels with these springs through means of these nuts, right? So the more we push this idler wheel forward, the tighter it makes the track, and the more this idler wheel goes back, the looser the track. So anyway, when you hear me talking about this idler wheel with this flange riding on a rail, it's almost like a train, right? So these crawlers, or dozers, or bulldozers if it has the blade, they, even though they're heavy, right, lots of steel, lots of metal components, they actually have a pretty light footprint when it comes to ground pressure, because of the fact that the weight is distributed over 2 track systems, right? This one has 14-inch pads that go across by, I don't know, it's probably about 7 or 8 feet, you know? So that's probably a good 9 to 10 square foot of ground surface area just on one side. So double that. So let's just say 20 square feet touching the ground. You know, you do the math, dividing in a 5,000 pound machine. It's a lot less weight actually pushing down on the ground than it would be if you had, say, 4 tires on it. So anyway, better traction, right? Again, more surface area, more surface touching the ground. But back to the rails thing. So this idler wheel has this flange that acts like almost like a train wheel that rides inside of the track. So here's the underside of the track, which you don't normally see, right? The stuff that's touching the ground right now is the part that rides on the ground. But that flange and that idler wheel rides inside this chain. Some people will call this a chain. Some people will call it a rail. Others will call it a track assembly. And then the square pads that are on here are either pads, grousers, shoes. Again, different nomenclature depending on who you're talking to or where you are in the country. So basically what happens when this crawler, if I sat this on concrete surface right now, those 4 rollers would be touching the ground. This idler wheel could spin free. It wouldn't be touching the ground. And the drive sprocket in the back would be, I don't know, probably about an inch or so off the ground. So when this is on the tracks, on the ground, on a flat area, basically those rollers are what's rolling on this track, this rail. That's what's supporting the weight of the crawler. The idler is just a means of getting the track to go back around, and the drive sprocket is the means of actually turning the machine to roll it over the tracks. So ultimately, having a track on both sides of the machine is like almost like a train on rails. That's where the name rails come from with this. And then, of course, the drive sprocket in the back, the teeth on the sprocket, drive on these bushings, right? So when you're in the market to purchase a crawler, you might have someone say, hey, make sure the undercarriage is good. Well, when they're talking about the undercarriage, again, it was all the yellow components we saw over there, the idler wheel, the sprocket, the rollers, but it's also in the track assembly, right? This rail where the rollers roll on top of, right? It's almost like a train track, like I said. And they roll and they will start to wear. Let's see if I can turn this a little bit here. You can see where the flange of that roller, not only is it on top, but it's also rolling on these edges to keep it centered. You can see here, or it's starting to flatten on top of the outside of this bushing area, right? All the way down. So that is an indication that this rail, this surface area that it rolls on, is wearing down, right? It originally was thicker than this. So that's the rail is worn here. They also tell you to look at the pins and bushings, right? So this is a pin, and the bushing is this part inside here, right? So on this one, I can feel a little bit of wear there, and I can feel a little bit of wear there. That's where the sprocket comes in contact with that bushing as it's driving. You can see this one over here is worn through, right? So this worn part that you see, that's the bushing, and then inside is the pin, which is what goes all the way through. Now, this is a bad example because someone's done some hacking on this one, but basically I got a little prop here so you can see. This is just a, I don't know, it's a piece of pipe, or what I'm going to use is an example of this bushing that goes in between here. And this bolt is going to be my example of a pin. So basically the pin goes through the bushing, all right? And then the sprocket rolls on the bushing here, which is these components. Now they're not going to spin, but that is basically the concept of a pin and bushing. So this is what you want to look out for. You don't want to see that your bushings are worn through where you can see the pin, right? Now, what some people will do is they will actually spin this bushing around so that this open area is over here. This is going to be on the drive side of it, right? Most of the time you're driving forward. So this is going to be the side on this specific track assembly that wore out first, right? So my little investigations here, what I can only assume is someone wanted to replace this link, right? You can press these pins out and you can replace this link assembly. And it looks like they wanted to replace it because it was worn, and they got the pin pushed partially through and couldn't get it all the way through. So they got some bubble gum welding going on here, and they welded it in place. And then on this side, sorry for them bouncing around, I don't know, they welded some kind of other rectangular piece of metal on there. Anyway, looks like they attempted to fix it, couldn't fix it, and then abandoned it, right? So this was the track that was on the right side of the machine. This is the one I fought with for that high-speed video. Remember I told you I cheated a little bit yesterday, right? and I got them started. So here's a master pin, right? You can see it's got a little groove on the top. And basically what that groove is for is there's these clips. So the pin, like this one, will go through and connect this link to the one on the other end. Once that pin goes through, you can see there's like some flats here. It's to keep it from spinning. See, the head's also flat. So when it goes through, it sits inside these flats and it doesn't spin. And once it's through, you can see on this side where the groove is, I'll put the clip in, hold it in place. So yesterday, I thought I'd get ahead of myself to make sure today's video wasn't too long. And I tried pushing these through. Well, I got to this point here and I said, all right, they're moving. It'll come out easy tomorrow. What I didn't take into consideration, you can see how it's nice and smooth here and it's worn inside. There's a shoulder on there, like a lip. And it's the same thing on this side. So when I pushed it out a little bit yesterday, it was still sitting on this shoulder. And then today when I went to go drive them out, it dropped off that shoulder into this low part that's worn. And then it got caught up on this shoulder. That's why I couldn't finish driving it out all the way. Now that it's out, I can get this pin through here and, hit it out with a sledge or whatever. But I always replace these whenever I do a crawler restoration. You can get these pins brand new. You can get these clips brand new from John Deere. So it's worth it to me. You don't have to deal with these shoulders coming in and out anymore. This thing's, I don't know, 50 years old, 50, 54, whatever. It's got a lot of wear on it. And the new master pins that I put in for the amount of mileage that I'll ever put on this thing, going to a couple shows or driving around the neighborhood, it'll never wear out like that. So in the event I ever have to take the track off to do a steering clutch or a brake band, it'll come apart a whole lot easier. So I'm sure some of you that know anything about crawlers are going to have probably already saw this, but you can see this thing's about as crooked as a politician. So it's a snake over here. That's not good. They're not supposed to bend like that. Again, going back to that reference of it being like a train on rails, they're pretty much supposed to be straight. They're just so worn out that they're all curvy and whatnot. And that's just because these links in between rub and wear, right? They're constantly in dirt and rock and water and mud. And it's just like sandpaper wearing down on all these components all the time. So being that they're this worn, if you don't keep that track tension tight like you should, not extremely tight like it was when I got it, but you run the risk of throwing a track or having a track fall off, which isn't fun to try to fix, especially if you're not at home. I don't use these for work. I don't use these for really moving dirt. They're pretty much, once I restore them, show tractors. I might go to a plow day with one. I might, push a little bit of dirt with the blade just to, make for some video content, but I'm never going to use this as a working machine. So if you were to purchase one of these with the intent of using it, for work, then yeah, you'd probably want to replace these tracks. I believe you can still get them. They're a little bit different. I think they've got 4 bolts instead of 2 for where the shoes go on, but I want to say they're about $4,000 per side. So again, you're looking to get a crawler. In the event you need to replace rails, chains, tracks, whatever it is you want to call it, let's say $4,000 a side, that's $8,000. We talked about $1,500 for steering clutches, the steering clutch for the engine. That's about $10,000. And we ain't even got it running yet. My engine's still sitting over there seized up from sitting, right? So they can get it really expensive really fast. So just keep that in mind. I don't know. That's about it for today. I'm pooped. I've had enough. I'm going to, I might start getting these tracks rolled up and put off to the side, or I might start cutting pads off. That's one more thing that I do want to recommend. I always replace all this hardware, right? This one's got double nuts in there. I have no idea why, but anyway, I remove all of these grouser pads or shoes, because when I have them sandblasted, and then I have 2.5-inch holes drilled in each one, and that's for rubber pads that I put on, again, so that I can use this on the street or a show or whatever. So I bring it to a machine shop. I've done both. I've had a machine shop mill out the holes, and I've had another shop water jet the holes. It ends up being about the same price. I forget, I'm not sure how many for a 4-roller, how many of these pads there are. I want to say there's about 50. So you figure roughly $5 per hole, whether you're having a machine shop machine it on a mill or a water jet company water jet them. The water jetting is a lot faster, but you're going to pay a little bit more upfront to have the program set up for it. They both end up coming out to be about the same. It's about $500 to have the holes drilled in these pads. So to put the rubber pads on this tractor, $500 for the holes and another $500 for the rubber pads with hardware. And I get those from a place in Pennsylvania called Zimmerman Oliver Cleat Track. So anyway, so when I remove these, right, you can only imagine they're rusted and corroded. To have to put wrenches on here, this one's tack welded on. Like, what a waste of energy, right? Trying to get those unbolted. So I get an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, and it fits in here perfect. And I get about halfway through the stud. As long as I can get the wheel in there halfway through that stud, I get a open end combination wrench, and I stick it on there, and I just boop, snap it, and it'll break that stud. So it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of energy. Again, I replace all the hardware. I use all brand new stuff anyway. So that's about it, man. Crazy day. Got a lot done though, right? Got the tracks off, a few other things. So we're making progress. So hopefully next weekend, maybe we can work on getting the undercarriages off. These there's 4 bolts here, 4 on this side, and then the 8 on the other side. These will drop this whole roller assembly down. So we'll probably get those removed next weekend, and maybe we'll start working on getting the final drives pulled off. We can look inside and check out the steering clutches. So anyway, that's about it. So thanks again for watching the video. If you can, subscribe. It'll let you know when I make a new one. I'm going to try to do it weekly if I can. Share it with your friends. I think before I did this video today, I was at 99. It's not too bad for like 2 or 3 weeks for a guy like me. I think that's pretty good. So thanks for watching. Hope you learned something today. Check back again for the next video. Peace.